So far in Revelation, we've read 3 series of 7 things. Jesus' 7 letters to the 7 churches in Asia, the 7 seals on the scroll that reveal God's judgments, and the 7 trumpet blasts to warn the people of the earth about the consequences of our stubbornness and ambition. There is one more series of 7 coming, the 7 bowls of wrath. But between the trumpets and the bowls, we get a symbolic narrative of the cosmic warfare between good and evil. In this section, we get to meet some of Revelation's most famous characters, the dragon and the beasts. And this is where we read about the famous mark of the beast, the most misinterpreted biblical symbol of all time, the number 666. With all of its monsters, at first glance, this part of John's vision is terrifying and otherworldly. But like the rest of Revelation, this section is a set of symbols that point to something we're already very familiar with. Hidden in the fearful images is a strong message of joy and hope. Because even though this part of John's vision feels like Halloween, this is actually John's version of the Christmas story. Let's go to Revelation chapter 12, verse 1. A great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. She was pregnant and was crying out in birth pangs, in the agony of giving birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his heads. His tail swept down 1/3 of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so that he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who was to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared for her by God, so that there she can be nourished for 1,260 days. See, this is the Christmas story right here. The pregnant woman with the crown of 12 stars is the people of Israel, in agony under the kingdoms and conquerors of this world, asking God to send them a Messiah. Satan, the enemy ruler of this world, who rules with violence and fear and oppression, opposes all challengers to his throne, especially a challenger like Jesus. Why? Because the rod of iron is a reference to Psalm 2, where God promises a Messiah who will use a rod of iron to break every nation into pieces like clay pots and establish a new kingdom, a worldwide kingdom of peace. There's a big reveal here. Behind our conquest mindset, behind all the systems of corrupt human government that have brought the disasters of the seals and the trumpets onto the world, there is a spiritual conspiracy. The dragon, the devil, has been working the whole time, twisting us to ruin the world God has made. He does it through our selfish economic practices, he does it through our endless political arguments, and he does it through kings and nations who are constantly at war. Satan isn't on one side or the other in our political debates or conflicts between countries. He circles all of it like a shark, looking for opportunities to make us anxious and angry, stoking the fire so that differences of opinion get worse and hopefully break out into full-on violence. He doesn't care who's right. He just wants us to keep killing each other because he hates God and he hates his human image. That is the so-called ruler of this world, unmasked. But God has promised us a new ruler, a Messiah, a Prince of Peace, who will put an end to kingdoms and nations in warfare. Here's that prophecy from the book of Zechariah, chapter 9, verse 9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter Zion. Shout aloud, O daughter Jerusalem. Lo, your king comes to you. Triumphant and victorious is he, humble and riding on a donkey, on a colt, the foal of a donkey. He will cut off the chariot from Ephraim and the war horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall command peace to the nations. His dominion shall be from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. As a symbol of peace, the true Messiah rides a donkey's colt instead of the white horse of a conqueror. His peaceful rule has no weapons of mass destruction, no warfare, and no borders to divide people. Satan has worked too hard building us up into empires and arms dealers ready to blow the world to hell at the push of a button. And he's worked too hard to do that to let some Messiah of peace come along and ruin everything. So of course the dragon tries to eat the baby. Satan tries to kill Jesus before he can grow up and challenge the world order. In the Christmas story, we read that King Herod, a servant of a corrupt human government with a conquest mindset, King Herod hears that a special child has been born in Bethlehem. What does he do? He orders all the babies in the area under a certain age to be killed. It's easy to see the conspiracy of the dragon behind that one. But we read in Matthew that Jesus and his family escaped to Egypt, just like the woman and her baby escaped in John's vision. So this is the Christmas story all around. But this symbol also has another layer. Jesus' movement of peace and righteousness, what we call the early church, was just getting going in Jerusalem around the time that John had his vision. The people of Judea were divided about Jesus in the agony of birth pangs, so to speak, and the devil saw his chance to destroy the Jesus movement before it could really get off the ground. After a series of political problems and assassinations, starting in 66 AD, Rome marched in and leveled the entire country of Judea. After a long and ugly siege, the city of Jerusalem was taken in 70 AD, and the devil hoped that that would put an end to the teachings of Christ right then and there. But God had other plans. Thousands of Christians escaped Jerusalem. Jesus' movement survived, and the people of Israel survived too by scattering across the empire until the Lord returns and calls us all back together again. I don't know how many of us want to add dragons and beasts to our celebration of Christmas, but if it helps us remember that the birth of Christ is a dangerous, rebellious political story, I'm all for it. We tell the story like Jesus only came to die to save me from the wrath of God, the wrath that God feels about my own personal private sins. But we have to remember that Jesus' birth was also the beginning of an entirely new kind of kingdom, not based on power or bloodshed or the conquering mindset, but on the worship of God and the way of peace and justice. Jesus came to save us, not just from our personal sins, but from sin and the system of death and oppression that the devil has tricked us into building for ourselves since the dawn of civilization. And that new kingdom is deeply engaged in spiritual warfare against the old, violent, conquest-minded kingdom that the devil has taught us to build. Of course the dragon wants to eat this woman's baby. The baby Jesus is the first shot fired in a spiritual war that actually has a chance to take him down. So let's see how that battle goes. Back to Revelation chapter 12, verse 7. And war broke out in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon. The dragon and his angels fought back, but they were defeated. There was no longer any place for them in heaven. The great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who was called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven proclaiming, "Now have come the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Messiah. For the accuser of our comrades has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. But they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they did not cling to life even in the face of death. Rejoice then, you heavens, and those who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, for the devil has come down to you with great wrath, because he knows that his time is short." So when the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. But the woman was given the 2 wings of the great eagle, so that she could fly from the serpent into the wilderness to her place where she is nourished for a time, times, and half a time. Then from his mouth the serpent poured water like a river after the woman to sweep her away with the flood. But the earth came to the help of the woman. It opened its mouth and swallowed the river that the dragon had poured from his mouth. Then the dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her children, those who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. Yes, after 11 chapters of human failure, of death and destruction, the real mastermind behind all of it is unmasked. It's Satan, God's enemy from the beginning, the tempter from the Garden of Eden, the father of lies, the author of murder and bloodshed and selfishness and conquest. And God and the angels are finally moving to put an end to his reign of terror. This part of John's vision is almost funny in the way that it describes the dragon's failures one after another. He's a monstrous 7-headed dragon, but he can't even eat a little baby. Michael and the angels bounce him out of heaven. The word that John uses means to toss something away like trash without caring where it lands. He falls to earth and decides to go after the people of Israel again and again. But no matter how hard he tries, God's people always manage to escape. The dragon opens his mouth to breathe fire, but water comes out, and the earth swallows it up before it can hurt anybody. So the dragon is frustrated and storms off to see what he can do against the followers of Jesus. But the most embarrassing thing for the great and terrible dragon in all of this is how he is defeated. Verse 11 says, "But they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony, for they did not cling to life even in the face of death." All the power of the dragon's conquest and death is broken quickly and simply by a carpenter's son from Galilee and his followers who aren't afraid to die. All it takes to unmask and defeat the empire are a few people who say no, who expose its lies and refuse to participate in the great myth of conquest. People who choose to live in an alternative kingdom of wisdom, peace, justice, and love. The dragon does what the dragon does. He kills those people. But in doing so, he reveals himself for what he is in a way that the world can no longer deny. People see Jesus, a good man, on the cross, and they start to wake up. This reveals something else about all the rage and pride and bloodlust that our nation-state system depends on. That attitude, that mindset, is its weak point. That spirit makes it impossible for us to imagine that a few innocent, ridiculous martyrs could be our undoing. But what does history prove over and over again? All it takes is a few martyrs to unmask it, the blood of the Lamb and the word of their testimony. And then all of a sudden the great evil is exposed for what it is, and it falls. But of course, the dragon's not done. If brute force attacks just make God's people stronger and more faithful and expose the devil's real motives to the world, there's got to be another way to ruin them. What if, instead of trying to kill us, the devil tries to recruit us to his side? Let's go to the last verse in chapter 12. Then the dragon took his stand on the sand of the seashore. And I saw a beast rising out of the sea, having 10 horns and 7 heads, and on its horns were 10 diadems, and on its heads were blasphemous names. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard, its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And the dragon gave it his power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seemed to have received a death blow, but its mortal wound had been healed. In amazement, the whole earth followed the beast. They worshipped the dragon, for he had given his authority to the beast, and they worshipped the beast, saying, "Who is like the beast, and who can fight against it?" The beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. It opened its mouth to utter blasphemies against God, blaspheming his name and his dwelling, that is, those who dwell in heaven. Also, it was allowed to make war on the saints and to conquer them. It was given authority over every tribe and people and language and nation, and all the inhabitants of the earth will worship it, everyone whose name has not been written from the foundation of the world in the book of life of the Lamb that was slaughtered. Let everyone who has an ear listen. If you are to be taken captive, into captivity you go. If you kill with the sword you must be killed. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. The dragon decides to switch tactics and do what he does best: deceive. He calls a beast from the sea with the same awkward number of heads and horns that he has, and he gives it his own power to rule the world. What does the symbol of the beast mean? Hundreds of years before John had his vision, the prophet Daniel had his own terrifying vision of the empires of the world. He saw them as a succession of beasts that came up from the sea to conquer and oppress. First it was Babylon, a lion with eagle's wings, then Persia, which was a bear, Greece was a leopard, and Rome was a mystery beast with iron teeth and 10 horns. The beast John sees here is stitched together out of all of them. It represents the concept of empire, of forcing peace through order and violence, of governmental strength. It represents every political system that adopts the methods of conquest and control, and every populace that puts its trust in political leaders who promise victory through warfare. And that's all of us. In amazement, the whole earth follows the beast. Again, we are so in love with the idea that we can perfect human life by rearranging things politically and by force that we can't imagine the truth, that the beast is actually a puppet of Satan, that the whole empire mindset is flawed, that our efforts to perfect the world through force are actually what destroys it and us. The danger for John's churches is the same as it is for us right now. If we don't consciously choose to belong to Jesus' alternative kingdom, if we don't actively worship the one who sits on the throne at the center of the cosmos instead of our emperors, we will end up worshiping the beast by default. We will get sucked into all the human effort to put things into a safe and proper order that we can manage, and all of the violence that we have to do to advance that order and protect it. Let me say this as clearly as I can. There is a line where patriotism becomes idolatry, and every nation and every citizen is at risk of crossing that line and becoming an agent of destruction and death, of pursuing the interests of its government instead of the good of people and the earth. And what John sees is that the whole thing is a very effective trick of Satan to get us to do the work of corruption that Satan couldn't do himself. This part of the vision comes with a warning. It can be tempting to rise up and fight against the beast with violence, but that's what Satan wants. The beast is an ugly stuffed animal stitched together from the spare parts of everyone who thought their empire was the answer to humanity's problems. There is still room on that beast for our flag if we use the beast's methods, even in the name of fighting the beast. Satan doesn't care who's right, and he doesn't care who wins. He just wants us killing each other, so he's happy if we feel righteous or justified while we do it. So John warns his churches to stay peaceful. They might take you captive, they might kill you, but understand that those things are better than becoming part of the beast. John's people in the churches in Asia were sharply aware that Christians are sometimes called to be the martyrs who make the ultimate sacrifice to unmask the beast and the dragon. And if that's what God calls you to do as a follower of Jesus Christ, you do it. But our struggle isn't only against the beast of political power. Satan has one more horribly deceptive and cruel move that he can make. Now that he has the whole world worshiping governments of conquest, he can hit us on our blind side by corrupting the only thing that could keep those governments in check: our religion, our spirituality, our faith. Revelation chapter 13, verse 11. Then I saw another beast that rose out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority of the first beast on its behalf, and it makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound had been healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in the sight of all. And by the signs that it is allowed to perform on behalf of the beast, it deceives the inhabitants of the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that had been wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast could even speak and cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. Also, it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell who does not have the mark. That is the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let anyone with understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a person. Its number is 666. It looks like a lamb, but it speaks like a dragon. That is the most heartbreaking judgment possible of our religion that I can imagine. Make no mistake, what John sees is that all the religion that teaches its members to support the state, that influences the state, that imitates the conquest mindset of the state, is in the end just the worship of the beast. This is so gut-wrenching because the temptation is powerful and so many of us fall to it. Jesus taught his disciples to pray, "Your kingdom come." But it's obvious that at first, even his disciples thought that Jesus meant a kingdom like the ones they knew, with a king and generals and war horses and execution trees. Throughout our history, the church has become that kind of kingdom over and over again because that's all we know. We've invaded nations and tortured heretics and flown our Christian flags over blood-stained battlefields whenever we've had the chance. You and me are not innocent in this. We've believed the lie that the job of the church in the United States is to make our country a more Christian one. We've angled for political power and influence. We've legislated our morality onto others. We've supported the worst, most corrupt, most warmongering politicians because they promise to give us the power to do something about issues that we care about, like abortion or prayer in schools. We've made ourselves obstacles to the equal rights of others. We've excused and justified and supported evil in exchange for influence and tax-exempt status. The false lamb takes the fear and lust for power of God's own people and turns it into power for the beast. When we sell our souls to the state, God's kingdom becomes a sorry little reflection, not of Christ, but of Satan's power in the world. The disciples struggled with this in the New Testament. The churches in Asia in John's time struggled with it. The church down through history has struggled with this temptation. And every time when we trade our focus and our commitment to embodying Christ in the world for the beast's promise of safety or riches or power or a good reputation, we end up looking like lambs, but talking like dragons. How do you know if this second beast has its sights on you? I think we all need to ask ourselves some uncomfortable questions. Does the news have us scared that our country is losing its Christian identity? Do politicians or preachers tell us that God will judge our nation if we don't vote a certain way? Do the people around us make excuses for bad leadership or sinful decisions because the person making them is on our side? Do we feel like bad Christians if we think differently about politics, or we don't have an opinion, or we don't participate as much as the other people in our church? Were we taught by our elders to be good citizens instead of good neighbors? Do we use the Bible to find excuses for why we don't have to be loving, compassionate, and kind towards certain groups of people? Are we suspicious and judgmental of each other, using labels like liberal or fundamentalist, or worse, against our own brothers and sisters in Christ? If any of those questions, or anything else that the false lamb reveals about how Satan manipulates us through religious propaganda, if any of that makes you uncomfortable, good. The point of John's vision is to give you vision so that you can see it. It's an election year, and the false lamb is going to be hard at work between now and November to keep us panicked and suspicious and fearful and greedy for power. Keep your ears open and learn to recognize the voice of the dragon, even when it comes from people who look like lambs to you. Now, the mark of the beast. Everyone's always trying to figure out which world leader's name adds up to 666 so that we don't take his mark and accidentally worship Satan. Candidates that I've heard over the years have been Emperor Nero, different popes of the Catholic Church, different Islamic leaders, Adolf Hitler, Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, just to name a few. So who is this beast, and what is his real name? In our translation of the Bible, it says that 666 is the number of a person. But another way, the way used by the spiritualist reading strategy, would be to translate 666 as the human number, or the number of humanity. In John's vision, God is all about sevens. 7 eyes, 7 spirits, 7 horns, 7 seals, 7 trumpets, 7 bowls, and on and on. 7 is the number of completion, the number of days it took God to create the cosmos and fill it with life. People were created on day 6, in God's image, but not God. Our projects are always aimed at becoming our own gods, but we always fall short. Our leaders offer us the peace and security that only God can give, but they fail every time. 6 is a number trying to become 7, but always falling short. A 666 is a triple failure. That's the human number. And it could be applied to any leader or any of us who buy what the beast and the false lamb are selling. You want to know who the Antichrist is, even though he doesn't even appear in Revelation? The Antichrist is me. It's you. It's all of us together who get seduced into worshiping the beast's power or selling our souls to the false lamb of imperial religion. 666 is our number because we try to be our own gods. We've created a world where to be somebody important, to buy and sell in the marketplace of money and influence and ideas, you have to worship the beast of conquest. People, businesses, and churches that don't participate get wiped out, or worse, ignored. But 666 is our number because we consistently fail to achieve the perfection and success that we promise to ourselves. The dragon is a loser. The beast is an ugly toy made of scraps. The false lamb is creepy and awkward. But when has that ever stopped people from following and worshiping and supporting their methods and philosophies, from trying to use what we know is manipulative and evil to get what we want? 666 is our number, but the true lamb, the Messiah, our Christ, has a different number for us. Chapter 14, verse 1. Then I looked, and there was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him were 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven like the sound of many waters and like the sound of loud thunder. The voice I heard was like the sound of harpists playing on their harps, and they sing a new song before the throne and before the 4 living creatures and before the elders. No one could learn that song except the 144,000 who have been redeemed from the earth. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. These follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They have been redeemed from humankind as firstfruits for God and the Lamb, and in their mouth no lie was found. They are blameless. 144,000 is our number. The nice, round, solid, complete number of God's people. These are the ones who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. The satanic trinity of dragon, beast, and false lamb is not invincible. Their victory over us is not inevitable. Christ has a kingdom of people who are blameless and true and pure, and that kingdom fights back. We fight back through worship, centering our lives on the one who sits on the throne of the universe with our harps and guitars and our drums and our prayers. We fight back by telling the truth, by warning people of the consequences of the conquest mindset, by showing the world Christ's path to peace and reconciliation with each other and with God. Chapter 14, verse 6. Then I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven with an eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come, and worship him who made heaven and earth, the sea and the springs of water." Then another angel, a second, followed, saying, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. She has made all nations drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication." Then another angel, a third, followed them, crying with a loud voice, "Those who worship the beast and its image and receive a mark on their foreheads or on their hands, they will also drink the wine of God's wrath, poured unmixed into the cup of his anger. And they will be tormented with fire and sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and in the presence of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment goes up forever and ever. There is no rest, day or night, for those who worship the beast and its image and for anyone who receives the mark of its name." Here's a call for the endurance of the saints, those who keep the commandments of God and hold fast to the faith of Jesus. And I heard a voice from heaven saying, "Write this, blessed are the dead who from now on die in the Lord. Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them." These angels fly through heaven, fighting back against the kingdom of this world with their gospel message of hope and peace and warning. And when we preach the gospel, we join them in the fight. And we fight back through simple, small, holy living, following the example and commandments of Jesus. Over and over in the Gospels, Jesus tells parables where the world is a farm or an orchard or a vineyard. God is growing souls here, and he's going to give them as much time as he needs to grow a good crop. But one day Christ will return, and it will be harvest time, and all the weeds will be pulled, and whatever is rotten will be burned up. But those who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, obedient to Christ, humble, loving, and compassionate toward their neighbors, will be gathered together into the storehouse of God. Chapter 14, verse 14. Then I looked, and there was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like the Son of Man, with a golden crown on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Another angel came out of the temple, calling with a loud voice to the one who sat on the cloud, "Use your sickle and reap, for the hour to reap has come, because the harvest of the earth is fully ripe." So the one who sat on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Then another angel came out from the altar, the angel who has authority over fire, and he called with a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Use your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of the vines of the earth, for its grapes are ripe." So the angel swung his sickle over the earth and gathered the vintage of the earth, and he threw it into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden outside the city, and blood flowed from the winepress as high as a horse's bridle for a distance of about 200 miles. What really speaks to me from this passage is how effective the dragon is at deceiving even the people of God with his beast and false lamb puppets. We are so invested in politics as the path to salvation that the politicians who want our votes can easily manipulate us with promises of protection or support. We're always so busy trying to uncover the dark secrets of our political opponents, trying to read between the lines, trying to identify the beast, that we can't look in the mirror and realize that the beast is all of us. We have a blindness to evil when it comes to our politics and our nation that's dangerous. And that blindness consistently distracts us from following Christ in the small ways that he commanded. The writers of the New Testament commanded their churches to respect the government. Peter puts it really concisely in 1 Peter 2:17. Honor everyone, love the family of believers, fear God, honor the emperor. The emperor at that time was no friend of Christians, but the apostles knew that Jesus wanted them to honor his authority anyway, because we're supposed to be humble people. But even though the early Christians were gentle like doves, they were still wise as snakes, and they had their eyes wide open. They had no illusions that the governments they lived under were holy or righteous or even good. Even as they taught each other to respect governing authorities, they saw those authorities as part of a corrupt world that will soon pass away. Paul writes in 1 Corinthians 7, verse 29, "I mean, brothers and sisters, that the appointed time has grown short. From now on, let even those who have wives be as though they had none, and those who mourn as though they were not mourning, and those who rejoice as though they were not rejoicing, and those who buy as though they had no possessions, and those who deal with the world as though they had no dealings with it. For the present form of this world is passing away, and I want you to be free from anxieties. Now, that's kind of a passage about marriage, but it's actually a passage about our whole approach to the world. The Christian hope is not a more perfect version of the corrupt kingdoms that we already have. It's an entirely new heavens and a new earth and a new kingdom without weapons or borders or money or flags, ruled by the true Lamb, the Lord Jesus Christ. We can respect the authority that rules this world while it's still around, but we have to always look for the day when Christ returns and puts an end to all of it, when the true kingdom of peace is established and made permanent. I can hear the gasps of some of my more patriotic friends right now. But don't you love your country? Do I love it the way I love God? Do I love it the way I love my family? Do I love it the way I love my brothers and sisters in Christ? Do I love it the way I love you? No, I don't. I like it here. I think we do a lot of things right. I'm deeply grateful for every law enforcement officer and librarian who gets up every day and works to make this place the best it can be. I respect and honor and support what's good and just about our life together. But the United States of America is not the kingdom of God. It is not my home. And it is subject to all the same temptations to propaganda and violent power as every other nation in history. And the moment I forget that, the moment I start to believe that our government or one of the political parties in it is somehow above normal human failures because we're so special in the eyes of God, I am also in danger of falling to the temptations of the beast and the false lamb. Nations are temporary. Churches and denominations are temporary. People are temporary. The dragon and the beast and the false lamb are temporary. And everything temporary is corruptible. But God is on the throne of the universe forever. The kingdom of our Christ is eternal. And in that kingdom, not here, in that kingdom is where I put all of my hope and love and faithfulness. This week, I want us to use the spiritual qualities that John tells us we need to fight the dragon in all of its forms: endurance and wisdom. As our politicians try to scare us and shock us into hating our neighbors who see things differently than we do, as they try to entice us with promises of protection and power, I want us to learn to see all of that for what it really is. I want us to be awake to the fact that people are saying and posting all kinds of things to manipulate our emotions so that they can count on us for our support. I want us to learn to see that manipulation coming, so that we can stop reacting emotionally to things, so that we can have a grounded, eternal center in our lives that is way bigger and way more solid than any government or nation. How do we do that? Well, we follow the Lamb wherever he goes. Here's my favorite quote from my favorite book on Revelation, Reverse Thunder by Eugene Peterson. We choose. We follow the dragon and his beasts along their parade route, conspicuous with the worship of splendid images, elaborated in mysterious symbols, fond of statistics, taking on whatever role is necessary to make a good show and get the applause of the crowd in order to get access to power and become self-important. Or we follow the Lamb along a farmyard route, worshiping the invisible, listening to the foolishness of preaching, practicing a holy life that involves heroically difficult acts that no one will ever notice in order to become simply our eternal selves in an eternal city. The revolutionary question that our Christian faith has asked from the very beginning, starting with Jesus, is this: can we learn to be small enough to be truly great? I'll leave you to chew on that one, and we'll see you next week.